Today I will start with a song. Εσούρωσα κι αργήσαμε, μα όσο και να φταίω, περπάτα να προλάβουμε το τραμ το τελευταίο. Περπάτα να προλάβουμε το τραμ το τελευταίο. Τραγκαντρούκ το καμπανάκι, τραγκαντρούκ μες στο βραδάκι. Τραγκαντρούκ το καμπανάκι, να μας πάει κούτσα κούτσα στο παλιό μας το τσαρδάκι. Περνούν πολύ μιζέρικα τα νιάτα μας τα έρημα, αλλά άνοιξε το βήμα σου να φτάσουμε στο τέρμα. Αλλά άνοιξε το βήμα σου να φτάσουμε στο τέρμα. Τραγκαντρούκ το καμπανάκι, θα στρωθείς και θα σ' αρέσει. Τραγκαντρούκ κι αν βρούμε θέση λίγο πάνω σου να γύρω, γιατί έχω γίνει φέση. Εμείς με τραμ πηγαίνουμε και άλλοι με ταξάρες. Για μας τα τόρτια κι οι διπλές και για άλλους οι εξάρες. Για μας τα τόρτια κι οι διπλές και για άλλους οι εξάρες. Τραγκαντρούμ και στο βραδάκι, τραγκαντρούμ το καμπανάκι. Τραγκαντρούμ το καμπανάκι, τραγκαντρούμ τι κρίμα πούνε να σε τόσο φτωχαδάκι. So this was the last tram. Yes, and welcome to Sanem Sunday service. Welcome again. This is the 19th of October and it is Sunday. I decided to do the show only in English, so this will be the situation. I get super confused and yeah, not necessary. For Turkish, I will do something separate maybe. Belki daha sonra Türkçe bir şey yaparım diye düşünüyorum ama bugün İngilizce yapmayı düşünüyorum programı. And again, we will start from Exarcheia today because we are in Exarcheia. I cannot show you right now. I cannot show you right now what is around me. Yeah, all I wanted was this music. I will not try to show you today what is around me because it doesn't make sense. I'm in a house and I have to be because I need some audio isolation to be here. But we are in Exarcheia and we will move from Exarcheia today. We will start from here, start from this neighborhood. And starting from here, moving from here, today I want to talk about ideals, historical precedents, and dreams. I want to talk about how we express and define glory, what language we use when we want to speak of emancipation, political ideals and ways of building communities. But we will start from Exarcheia, from this neighborhood. Welcome and thanks for joining me here. Well, I've told you before that I used to like Exarcheia. I used to love Athens, actually, simply because I loved Exarcheia. I think this was a very special neighborhood. And I'm not the only one who thought that this was a very special neighborhood. This was almost a free zone. Since the beginning of the 1980s, Exarcheia was almost a free zone. And there were reasons for this. But lately, if we were come to the present, today something is very clear. It's that behind me, where you do not see right now, I really feel the urge to show you around what I cannot. Where you don't see right now is a square over here, around here, like behind this wall. And this square used to be a place with lots of green and trees, and it was a place where everyone could come and hang out and sit and join the conversations. And this is not the case anymore because the trees have been cut and this is not a place where different people like to hang out. For many decades, Exarcheia was a place with a very strong political tradition. Greece already was a country, as you may know, with strong subversive traditions. Sometimes we call these traditions leftist. They don't call themselves leftist. They call themselves sometimes anarchist, but sometimes not even anarchist. They prefer to call themselves anti-establishment or anti-power. And in any case, when I say they, we need to keep in mind that I'm talking about a plurality, because the subversive movements here in Exarcheia that made this neighborhood special for so many years, they're not centralized. They are more like a plurality, an amalgam of different ideologies, groups, organizations, or networks, non-organizations. But what made this place quite special was the open public space and the acceptance, the inclusion that it showed towards everyone except for the police. In Exarcheia, you would see all kinds of people. You just would not see police. If the police showed their face, if they showed only the tip of their nose, riots would begin. And there was a big culture for riots, as you might have seen on your TVs, as you might remember from the years of the Greek crisis, the crisis. It was as if people just looked for reasons to make riots. This is not the case anymore. Riots do not happen as often. They used to happen in the past. And I think that riots do not happen as often, and that the police is stationed here, right here, 20 meters across from me right now in the square, is a great indicator. It's a very significant indicator about where Greek society and where Greek politics has arrived. From a place where the police could not be, we have come to a place where the police holds the corners and the plurality of individuals, not necessarily political individuals, but also of misfits, of all kinds of subversives, are not here anymore because there is no place to sit, simply. Exarcheia has a history of political activism, as we would call it today, or political activity, since the Civil War, actually, since the Greek Civil War. But it definitely became more pronounced, this identity became more pronounced in the 1970s because of the polytechnic uprising. So Greece, after the Civil War, which followed the Nazi invasion and the Second World War, the right wing won, the leftists, the communists lost, and after that was a repressive regime that lasted for almost a quarter of a century. It started at the new state was founded at the end of the 1940s, and the 1950s was a period of oppression, we can say authoritarian regime. In the 1960s there was an opening, there was a relative liberalization, and leftist parties were allowed to form and to exist. But this did not last long. It ended with the colonel's coup in 1967. And this started a regime that was more authoritarian than the one before, and which lasted for 7 years. Now this regime ended, the colonel's regime ended in 1974, but the beginning of the end was starting in 1973, in November, with the polytechnic uprising. The 1960s was a turbulent time. There was a lot of street movements, there was huge cultural transformation, music, rock, drugs, and sexual liberation. So this affected all countries, including Greece, of course. And the colonel's regime had to make sure that they were in control of the society, which meant that they had to control the student movement and the street movement. So what triggered the polytechnic uprising was the new legislation that brought obligatory conscription, forced conscription, to students, to male students who were unionized, who were therefore active in the student movement. This was like the last drop in the cup to start an uprising. Students started gathering in the Polytechnic University on the 14th of November. The Polytechnic University is just on the border of Exarcheia. It is like 200 meters down this road. And students started gathering there, and they started protesting the authoritarian acts of the regime. But the regime acted with violence, they reacted violence, and on the 17th of November they entered the Polytechnic school with tanks, killing many students, I think about between 20 and 40, I'm not sure today, but killing many students. This was the beginning of the end of the junta, of the military regime that ruled Greece for 7 years, starting from 1967. The military regime actually ended in 1974, a few days after the occupation of the north of Cyprus by Turkish forces. So it was actually the Turkish occupation of Cyprus that brought the end of the regime of the colonels. But that's an interesting other detail which I will talk about another day. What is important for today and for my discussion today is that the Polytechnic uprising brought the end of the junta, which was very illegitimate, and it had become even more illegitimate because the public opinion held that the colonels, who were military men, they were soldiers, and they had not been able to act to stop the Turkish occupation of Cyprus. They had given over a part of the national land to the national enemy. So this was a big negative point on the grade report of the junta, of the colonel's regime. And in consequence, it gave great legitimacy to whatever was against that regime. And one of this was the street movements, this plurality which I just mentioned, of anarchists, of leftists, of student movement, which had managed to start the beginning of the end of the junta. So what happened after that was that Exarcheia became a free zone. After 1974, Greece gradually liberalized. In 1981, it joined the European Union. By this accession, it was like certified that Greece was a top-tier democracy and it belonged to the Western world of liberal democracies and freedom of expression and social inclusion and so on and so forth. And Exarcheia remained a free zone as these were happening in Greece. And it remained a place that was open to everyone except for the police, because despite the regime having democratized, many parts of the Greek society, important segments of the Greek society, and especially the anti-establishment movement, still saw in the police an ally of the regime and of the authoritarian oppressive identity of the Greek state, which they argued continued and did not stop after the colonial's regime ended. And clashes continued. Actually, when you start living in Greece, when I came here in 2018, I noticed that there was a tradition of demonstration and riots here. And one of the most important dates for the demonstration and riots was the 17th of November. Each 17th of November, starting from a few days before, people gathered in front of the polytechnic. They commemorated the students who had been massacred by the colonial's regime. And on the 17th of November, a huge march started from the polytechnic. It crossed all of Athens and it reached the American embassy. In front of the American embassy, as a tradition, they burnt the US flag, the American flag. And after that, they came to Exarcheia for riots. So in my first 17th of November, I was very excited. I was actually super impressed because as you know already, I had come to Greece after Ankara, after living in Ankara since 2012. And by 2018, when I moved to Greece, streets had become out of access in Turkey. So we could not demonstrate, we could not even chill on the streets. And I had really been missing demonstrations. Like, I've never been a riot person, but I love a big demonstration. So I came to Athens and I was hunting demonstrations already. And of course I couldn't miss the 17th of November. So I went to this big demonstration, we marched. I was really impressed that such a big crowd could march in such feeling of safety. And then we reached the American embassy, and after the American embassy, people warned me to get home quickly because I lived in Exarcheia and riots would start. So I would want to make sure that I could get home safely. So that's what I did. I started walking back to Exarcheia. I was walking down the Alexandros Avenue. I saw one garbage container being set on fire. Like, there was this little fire in the middle of a large avenue, the Alexandros Avenue, and I saw TV crews zooming into that fire because they had to show riots on their TV screens. It's a tradition that there are riots on the 17th of November. Everybody expects this, everybody wants this. And this is part of the state discourse to discredit Exarcheia and to make it seem like a dangerous, dodgy place. So there was that little fire and people were zooming on it. I passed by it and I walked to my house. And from my balcony I watched the rest of the riots. And yes, indeed, there were riots that night. As every night, as every 17th of November during the years that I lived here. Yes, so now I want to sing a song that was almost an anthem of the 17th of November. They sing the song every year almost while they burn the American flag. It's a song that talks about the desire to see a day that is not cloudy, the desire to see the sky clear, and the desire to get rid of the tyrants finally and to reach a day that they can live freely. And, they can be free individuals and free subjects and go out to the world without oppression in absolute freedom. So this is the song that symbolizes it, and I always used to love it. Ποτέ θα κάμει, ποτέ θα κάμει ξαστεριά, ποτέ θα φλεβαρίσει, ποτέ θα φλεβαρίσει, να πάρω το του φέτσι μου, Na paroto tu fecimu et in morphi patrona, tin morphi patrona, nakatevo sto nomalo. Nakatevo sto nomalo. Esti strata tu musuru, sti strata tu musuru. Nakamo manes dijos ius. Nakamo manes dijos ius. Γυναίκες δίχως άντρες, γυναίκες δίχως άντρες, να κάμω και μωρά παιδιά. Να κάμω και μωρά παιδιά. Ένα κλέντυχος μανάδες, να κλέντυχος μανάδες, ποτέ θα καμίξα στεριά. This is a very nice song. I had learned of it first when I was really young and when I had run into an album by Nikos Xylouris, who is a famous and left-leaning Greek musician from Crete. And I loved this song. I loved the revolutionary zeal that it expressed. You know, when will the sky clear? When will I be free to talk freely and to live freely? So it was all very good. But I noticed in the demonstrations that I joined that people, yes, they loved singing this song, but they would always be like, they would sing the first part of the lyrics very energetically and with a lot of zeal, but then as the song progressed, the voices would go lower and lower and lower. So they were like, and then they would be, especially towards the end, either they don't, like, I felt first as if they didn't remember the lyrics, and I wanted to check the lyrics, and I found out that this song is actually about killing sons, making mothers cry, making babies cry because their mothers are gone. Therefore, it also talks about killing mothers, and making babies cry and making women lose their husbands, and it's generally about killing people. And this is a Cretan song, okay? And the Cretan desire for liberation, like it is a revolutionary song, it is a song of liberation, but the Cretans won their liberation from the Turks, and therefore this song expresses a liberatory desire from something. But the desire for liberation, what I need to liberate myself from, according to this song, is my neighbor. So the song says, I want the sky to clear so that I can take my rifle and go down, and it mentions some geographical names in Crete, and I can start killing people. Well, now I'm sure, and I actually know that the people who were using the song in the demonstrations, they had no idea, they didn't know more than me that this was the background of the song. But then to my horror, I discovered that the song had other lyrics that were never included in any of the popular interpretations of the song. And these other lyrics were about making children cry during night for bread, and during dawn, let them cry for milk, and when the sky turns light, they can cry for their mother because their mother is also dead. So this is horrible. This horrible song, it just came to my attention, and I was really sad to learn that this song has such a horrible desire, you know, because I loved this song and I was very upset to learn this. But then there's something very interesting here, and today I want to talk about this. It is that we can hardly talk about liberation, we can hardly talk about emancipation and being free from oppressors without going genocidal, without praising ethnic cleansing in our language. This is quite interesting, and I think this is a point that we need to develop on. This is not just the case in Greece, it is also the case in Turkey, and I'm sure in many other contexts as well. But I'm gonna give you an example from Turkey that got my attention this week. I was listening to the news, and I was listening to a speech by the opposition leader of Turkey, the leader of CHP, Özgür Özel, who was reacting to the, you remember this big meeting that they did in Egypt about the reconstruction of Gaza, and some important leaders of the world put down signatures, and Turkish president was among them, and Trump was there, of course, and it was his big show. So Özgür Özel was criticizing this with very, you know, like there's a lot to be criticized. There's a lot to be criticized in the actions of the Turkish government vis-a-vis their own people, their own society and nation. There is also a lot to be criticized in what is happening in Gaza and how world governments are interacting with this problem, because, you know, every crisis is an opportunity and people know this very well. But what Özgür Özel felt the need to say at that occasion was, he was like, yeah, we don't care about Trump, we are not scared of Trump, because as a nation we are not scared of world leaders and we are not scared of world powers. If we had been scared of the Americans, and if we had been scared of the likes of Trump, we would not have done the Cyprus operation, we would now not have occupied Cyprus and therefore liberated the Turkish Cypriots, and likewise, we would not have won the national war for liberation, he said. Now this sounds all good and normal when you listen to it from Turkish, because in Turkish we are very used to hearing these speeches. But when you take one step backwards, and when you consider what is being said from a more global perspective, you notice that the good examples of liberation that Özgür Özel is giving in this speech are also examples of ethnic cleansing. The Turkish occupation of the north of Cyprus meant the expulsion of thousands, tens of thousands of Greek Cypriots, and the National War of Liberation, Turkish victory against the imperialists, which was basically against the Greek army that was acting by the hand of the imperialists. It meant the expulsion and ethnic cleansing of about 2 million Greeks of Minor Asia, who had been living in Minor Asia, what is today Turkey, since many, many years. So I understand all good, but not all good, you know, because if this is the language that we are using for liberation, then we are constantly locking ourselves up in smaller and smaller identities, and it becomes really hard to unite the different struggles that happen in different parts of the world. For instance, Özgür Özel is really not a sympathetic figure in Greece. Greeks even prefer Erdogan, maybe, because whenever they hear about Özgür Özel, whenever they hear something from him, it is always about the National War of Liberation, and it is about the Kemalist struggle, and so on and so forth. And these, in the memory of Greeks, they are memories of their own expulsion and their own erasure from their country. Therefore, of course, they do not sympathize with this. But this is the thing, Özgür Özel feels the need to refer to this memory because this is the biggest instance of glory, maybe the only instance of glory in the recent past of the Turkish nation, because this is the war against imperialism. Greeks don't matter there, they were just there as the hand, they were, you know, it's not about them if you ask Özgür Özel, I'm sure. And also if you ask the constituency of CHP, they will say this, these people are not particularly hateful towards Greeks. Actually, the secular Turks who vote for CHP are the part of the Turkish society that is more sympathetic towards the Greeks. But Greeks do not sympathize with them. because they constantly hear this language of erasure and oppression. It's the same thing happens with me, you know. I go to a 17th of November demonstration. I'm there to, you know, join the struggles. I have just come from Turkey. I feel very subversive. I want to be part of the movement. And, you know, I am tolerant. I can take a lot of things. I can accept a lot of things. But then the things that I hear are about the ethnic cleansing that was carried out against the Turks, and that is not at all talked about in Greek popular history. I mean, in Turkey at least, there has been some phases of the recognition of the Armenian genocide and the Pontiac genocide and so on and so forth. But I don't hear very often critical approaches from Greek people about what kind of an ethnic cleansing 1821 was. So this is a horrible situation, you know. It is curious sometimes. I find it curious how the right across the world unites so easily, and how the left generally finds it so super difficult to unite. But these are the reasons. Like, if you ask Özgür Özel, he will say that this speech does not have to do with Greeks, it has to do with imperialism. And if you ask the demonstrators of 17th of November, they will be like, of course this song has nothing to do with Turks, it's about anti-imperialism. But here is the problem. Anti-imperialism or imperialism does not come with its own face. So when you are fighting imperialism, you are rarely fighting the empire itself. You are fighting people who have the face of the empire for you. So in 1919, in Minor Asia, it was the Greeks that had the face of empire for the Turks. And in 1821 and in the long 19th century, for Greeks, it was the Turkish villagers, their Turkish neighbors, who had the face of the empire, even though they had nothing to do with the empire, most likely. Their only advantage was possibly paying less tax, because Muslims paid less tax in the Ottoman Empire, and that was it. And aside from that, they were equally oppressed by that regime. But that's the thing, like, where we are today, we have such a long memory of ethnic cleansing that we do not remember our struggles in any way other than this. Like, we might want to talk about national liberation and anti-imperialism and stuff, but the memory we have is about ethnic cleansing, expulsion, erasure, and one nation's glory is the other's genocide. This is the case for Turkey and Greece very clearly. I'm sure we can find like tens of other examples from across the world. And it's very curious, like, what are we gonna do with this? Because it's not like we can choose. It's not like there are hundreds of songs from which to choose. It's not like there are tens of stories from which to choose. These are the stories that we have at hand. Because for the last 200 years, this is what struggle has been about. People have been struggling against each other. They have been looking to earn liberation from each other. And therefore, they have reached this situation. We have reached this situation where we cannot talk about liberation without using the language or the cultural artifacts that refer to ethnic cleansing. It's quite sad. But interestingly, this was not the case at the beginning of this age. This was not the case when the age of genocide and ethnic cleansing was about to begin. There was another song that I likewise discovered from Nikos Xylouris. And it is a very fun song. It is also an epic song about not bowing to tyrants and dying for freedom and being against slavery and so on and so forth. But this song is very different than the previous one that I sang, and I will sing to you this song now, and then we will talk a bit more about this subject. Ως πότε παλικάρια θα ζούμε στα στενά, μονάχοι σαν λιοντάρια στις ράχες στα βουνά. Ως πότε παλικάρια θα ζούμε στα στενά, μονάχοι σαν λιοντάρια στις ράχες στα βουνά. Κάλλιονε μίας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή. Σπηλιές να κατοικούμε, να βλέπουμε κλαδιά, να φεύγουμε από το κόσμο γιατί πικρή σκλαβιά. Σπηλιές να κατοικούμε, να βλέπουμε κλαδιά, να φεύγουμε από το κόσμο γιατί πικρή σκλαβιά. Κάλλιονε μίας ώρας ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή. Να χάνουμε αδέρφια, πατρίδα και γονείς, τους φίλους, τα παιδιά μας και όλους τους συγγενείς. Να χάνουμε αδέρφια, πατρίδα και γονείς, τους φίλους, τα παιδιά μας και όλους τους συγγενείς. Κάλλιο είναι μια ώρα ελεύθερη ζωή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή, παρά 40 χρόνους σκλαβιά και φυλακή. So this super lovely song, it's by Rigas Fereos Velestinlis. Rigas Fereos is a Greek poet and thinker. He was one of the most influential political thinkers of the Greek Revolution in 1821. And he was, yes, also a poet and a very influential figure. He died in 1798, betrayed by his fellow compatriots and some Austrians and executed by the Ottoman army. So he died in 1798. He died before the 19th century even started. And in this poem, he talks about the value of freedom. He says, guys, until when are we gonna live like animals in caves up on the mountains? When are we going to be free? Because 1 hour of freedom is better than 40 years spent in slavery. We have to leave this world because we are slaves, but we would like to live in it because, you know, living is nice and freedom is nice. We are losing our brothers and land and our relatives because, again, the problem of slavery. But we will fight because 1 hour of free life is better than 40 years spent in slavery. A part that I didn't sing because it's not part of the song composed by Nikos Xylouris, or at least I have never heard those verses being sung. Further verses in this poem speak to Turks as well as to Greeks, and it says the following. It says, Ανδρέοι καπετάνοι παπάδες λαϊκοί σκοτώθηκαν και αγάδες με άδικον σπαθί και αμέτρητε άλλοι τόσοι και Τούρκοι και Ρωμοί ζωήν και πλούτον χάνουν χωρίς καμία φορμή. It says, even lords are being killed, even feudal lords are being killed by unfair assaults, and there are so many losses, so many meaningless losses, both from the sides of Turks and Greeks, and both Turks and Greeks are losing riches, they're losing wealth without any meaningful reason. So this guy, who is a very influential Greek thinker and one of the intellectual builders of the Greek uprising revolution of 1821, actually did not think that he was fighting against the Turks. He thought that he was fighting against tyrants. because this was the Enlightenment, you know. This was a time when people believed that the problem was the tyrants and simple people were not the enemy. This was the Enlightenment. It believed that people were nice, they were virtuous deep down, but they were corrupted by power and by authoritarian regimes. And if you could if you could get rid of these authoritarian regimes, life would be nice and people would be virtuous and everything would be fine. So this is the mindset from which Rigas Fereos speaks to us, because he has not yet seen that getting rid of tyrants in many cases will not be possible. This will not save the humans, and it will necessitate the killing of civilians. It will necessitate killing your neighbors. Rigas didn't know this because by the time that he died, it had not happened yet. This would happen later, in the centuries that were to follow, in the 2 centuries that were to follow, unfortunately. Yeah, so people kill their neighbors, but they never do it for the sake of killing their neighbors only. They always make sure to associate their neighbors with a big power or big empire. So in 1821, all of the Turkish, Muslim, you know, these names can be used interchangeably because they meant the same thing during the Ottoman times. In 1821, in the Peloponnese, all of the Turks and Muslims living in the area were killed, women and children alike, just like the adult male population, except for those who were integrated into the Greek society by changing religion. So some women and children were integrated into the society because Greek families took them in. You can say that they were stealing the children, you can say that they were building harems out of Turkish women, and they actually refer to harems a lot in the popular culture that relates to this period. Whatever is the case, they let some women and children live if they joined the community, but those who did not join the community were to be killed. Actually, this is very similar to what happened in Turkey in the Ottoman Empire in 1915 against the Armenians. Armenian children and women could be saved by conversion. Not always, not all of them. This was not the rule, but this was possible. But whoever did not convert and whoever did not integrate to the sovereign society was killed and was expelled and was erased from the territories that was under the sovereignty of the other nation. Because unfortunately, this is what the modern age has meant. The modern age has meant that the state belongs to the people, and therefore it has the face of the people. It cannot belong to 2 peoples at the same time. Like a state cannot be Greek and Turkish at the same time. It either has to be Greek or it has to be Turkish. It is a very interesting story. I think it should be researched. Like we should think about how modernity ended up here, because the promise was not this at all. The promise of modernity was that people would live freely without the oppression of tyrants, and there would be world peace, and there would be harmony, and they would create riches, and they would live happily, and they would reach the skies. This was the promise of modernity, but instead we got 200 years of ethnic cleansing and, you know, genocide and horrible things, and it still continues to this day. And we as human beings are very talented in giving names and making things look different than what they actually are. So we call our neighbors stabbers in the back, the suckers of nation's blood, human animals, etc. And we can find it quite easy to disregard their right to life and their right to, you know, freedom, just because they do not agree with us or they seem to belong, they happen to belong to another community. So I think we should really be careful with the language that we use when we are talking about liberation. Unfortunately, in radical left or anti-power, however you call this thing, once again, the language of ethnic cleansing is is widespread, is very prevalent. They may not they may not talk about ethnic identities, they may not talk about nations, but the very idea that some people do not deserve to live because of what they are, maybe they might be petty bourgeois or they might be anything else, but the idea that some people are less worthy of a life because of what they represent is quite deadly, I would say, and we should pay attention not to reproduce genocidal language in emancipatory speech. This is not a matter of virtue or ethics. This is purely a strategic and a tactical issue. If, as a Turkish person, when I want to talk about liberation, I keep giving references to the Turkish War of National Independence, which was done against the Greeks, I will never find decent allies from within the Greeks. And the same goes for the Greek society, the same goes for Italians, the same goes for, I don't know, whoever, for whatever nation we can think of. It is very sad that we only have this memory. We do not remember any other glorious moments than those of occupation and invasion and kicking the foreigners out of our land. Also because, ethnic cleansing is very easily measurable. It's immediate. Everyone, like all of a group or all groups who speak a language different than yours, you kick them out of the country and you're like, yes, I have succeeded, because it's immediate. You see it in front of you. Those people are not here anymore. And you have managed successfully to make a country that speaks only one language and belongs to only one religion and seems to be pure. But then what happens, because we are humans, we then divide within each other and we start fighting against each other once again, even if we forget the issue of class and of the structural inequalities that exist in every society and against which nationalism has not been a solution at all. So actually Rigas was more right, he made a lot of sense. He makes much more sense than all of this talk about national glory and fighting imperialists and American tyrants and stuff, because for Rigas it was clear. The empire is a tyrant, and whoever is not the empire, whoever is part of the people, is my ally. But of course this memory was lost, because this is how it's not how the centuries rolled by. So we should keep in mind that the cultural artifacts that are available to us come from 2 centuries of meaningless ethnic-based bloodshed, and we do not have another language for glorious struggles of freedom and emancipation from tyrants, which is very sad. But this lack of language and lack of cultural artifacts does not mean that we do not have this horizon. We just do not have the ways to express this, because this is how language works. Like, you cannot just invent things out of the air. You have to use what is given to you. And you have to pick songs from those that already exist, and you have to pick sayings and proverbs from those that already exist, because that's what culture is about. This is the ones that we already know. So to make these things, to appeal to the emotions of the masses, we use these references, but it also cuts us off from other masses to which ideally with which we have to unite our powers, because once again Stalin was wrong, and revolution in one country is never going to be successful. Therefore, if any kind of subversive movement wants to be successful, it has to go beyond national borders. And this is something that some revolutionaries have been saying for quite a long time. But yeah, slowly I'm approaching the end of today's show. I have one more song to sing yet. Thanks a lot for being with me today. I am trying to focus and to not lose my concentration. Therefore, I have not said many highs. I'm very happy to see you here, and thank you for being here. Now I want to close this show with a song with a more positive tone, from a singer called Şenay, who made a lot of songs in the 70s which were like so optimistic you want to cry. And actually, when we were children, when I was a child in the 90s, her songs were points of humor for us, because they were so ridiculously optimistic that we were like, who can ever believe this kind of thing? But there she was, and now I'm gonna sing one of her songs about how life could be so much better if people just accepted that love prevails before everything else, and the best people are those who care about others, and the wisest people are the ones who know themselves. By singing this song now, what I mean to say is not at all that in Turkish culture there are songs that are more peaceful than in the Greek culture. Not at all. It was just my choice of songs today that brought me here. Turkish pop also has some horrible examples, which maybe I can share with you in the coming weeks. But what is special here is the early 70s. In the early 1970s, this idea and this aura and this atmosphere of absolute positivity existed. So people in the 70s, they actually still believed definitely much more than we do today, that the world could be a nicer place if only people could join forces and they could come together and they could accept how things work and start making a beautiful place for themselves and for everyone else. So with today's remarks, I'll be closing today's show. Thank you very much for joining me. I will sing this song and then we will say goodbye. Remember to subscribe to my channel, because this way you can see what I will be doing, and also to like the video if you like it. These things matter on the universe of YouTube. Thanks a lot for being here with me today. This was Sanem Sunday service, and I'm very happy to see you here. Here comes Hayat Bayram Olsa by Şenay. Şu dünyadaki en mutlu kişi mutluluk verendir. Şu dünyadaki sevilen kişi sevmeyi bilendir. Şu dünyadaki en güçlü kişi güçlükten gelendir. Şu dünyadaki en bilgin kişi sevmeyi bilendir. Bütün dünya buna inansa, bir inansa, hayat bayram olsa, insanlar el ele tutuşsa, birlik olsa, uzansak sonsuza. Bütün dünya buna inansa, bir inansa, hayat bayram olsa, insanlar el ele tutuşsa, birlik olsa, uzansak sonsuza. Şu dünyadaki en olgun kişi acıya gülendir. Şu dünyadaki en soylu kişi insafa gelendir. Şu dünyadaki en zengin kişi gönül fethedendir. Şu dünyadaki en üstün kişi insanı sevendir. Bütün dünya buna inansa, bir inansa, hayat bayram olsa, insanlar el ele tutuşsa, birlik olsa, uzansak sonsuza. Bütün dünya buna inansa, bir inansa, hayat bayram olsa, insanlar el ele tutuşsa, birlik olsa, uzansak sonsuza. Bütün dünya buna inansa, bir inansa, hayat bayram olsa, insanlar el ele tutuşsa, birlik olsa, uzansak sonsuza. La la la la la la la la la la la la la la la la la This much for today. Thank you very much for being here. Let me see. Kemal'cim, Daniela, and Maitaro. And a few names that I cannot recognize, please let me know afterwards. Haluk abi ve Kemal'cim. Sizleri çok öpüyorum. Lots of kisses. And hope to see you again next week. Take care.